Good. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm joined with UFC play-by-play commentator Brendan Fitzgerald. How are you, Brendan?
I'm doing great, Jay. Great to be with you.
Thank you for coming on. Obviously, being lead commentator on Fight Night since 2018, how has that been?
Yeah, man, it's been quite an experience. It was a sport that I wasn't too familiar with before joining the UFC, but jumped in with both feet and loved the sport more than I ever thought possible. Loved the people I work with more than I ever thought possible. It's been quite a great ride over the last now like what 5 years. It's pretty crazy that it's been this long already.
Obviously, your previous work's been like highlight shows in basketball and college basketball. How's that jumping from that to play-by-play on live shows?
Yeah, it was quite a different professional experience for me. I was always in studio, as you mentioned, or kind of more covering things from a journalistic perspective. Talking about what happened or previewing what might happen for, the traditional team sports that are big in the US. And to jump into not only a different role professionally in terms of calling live events, like play-by-play commentator, however you want to say it, but also to a one-on-one combat sports situation. So it was different in several different ways, but I think my career to that point had prepared me in being comfortable in unique settings. The way that I came up in my broadcasting career, I was covering high school sports and rodeos and very obscure events, which forces you to adapt and fit in and try to become an expert on something that you weren't previously an expert on. So I think I had a lot of preparation in my career before working for the UFC and calling fights for mixed martial arts. And, here we are. It's been great.
Obviously, your debut as a commentator for the UFC was in Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series back in 2017. From that point onwards, do you think it will get as big as it has been lead commentator on fight nights?
I didn't know what to expect for the Contender Series, and I think a lot of people didn't know what to expect from that show, both in terms of what it might produce for the UFC and then like the spillover effects of what it could be. It turned out to be a great vehicle for a lot of us, both fighters and people on the broadcasting and production side, to get experience to um, find ourselves growing maybe in a different role or a different sport. And because it was a new show in general, it wasn't like the Ultimate Fighter where we had known what it was for a decade. It was a very new concept of the UFC creating its own promotion to find up and coming talent. It was essentially the UFC creating a regional promotion to find the best fighters that aren't yet in the UFC. And I think it went off as good as it possibly could have. I remember halfway through the first season, um, hearing from production higher ups like, yeah, this is really working. And it's definitely this is not going to be a one and done season. Like this show is definitely going to come back. We just have to figure out in what capacity and for how long. But for me, it was my first time commentating fights and my first foray into play by play and mixed martial arts. For Paul Felder, he had done a little bit of commentary, but um, he was obviously still a very active fighter in the UFC, but it allowed his name to grow both as a fighter and as a commentator. It really helped boost his career inside the octagon as well. People all of a sudden knew him a lot more. Dan Hellie is doing our uh, weigh-in shows for pay-per-views now, and he started on the first season of Contender Series. And Laura Sanko was the reporter. She's obviously grown into being a UFC reporter and now into being on commentary. So beyond just finding the best in up and coming fighters, it allowed our UFC production team to find some more people to fulfill production roles. And with the growth of the UFC, it was just it was great in a lot of different areas for them to find uh, new people. Because when you grow the sport like this, you obviously need people to kind of fulfill the roles on the way up, and I was able to do that.
Do you find you had any nerves going into the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series for being your first time commentating? And I know, me, like you said, and you wasn't a fan beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of nerves. Whenever you're in a new job, there's nerves. So, like, for instance, now, like, I don't really get nervous. whether I'm doing a show at the Apex, whether I'm doing a show in an arena, it's more of an excitement instead of a nervousness. But that just goes along with the territory. I always ask people, whatever they do they get nervous? Like I asked somebody who's like cutting my hair, and they're just like, "Do you ever get nervous?" And I'm just like, "Well, were you nervous to give my haircut today?" And they were like, "Well, no." And I said, "Were you nervous the first time you gave a haircut?" And they were like, "Well, yeah, I was so nervous." It's kind of the same concept. You can spin it to any different thing. If it's something new, you get nervous because you're excited for it. You want to do well. You know that you're not like an experienced person, and you know that all it's going to take is time and not being as good at something to get good at something. And so, yeah, there was definitely nerves for that first one, but I had been in the business long enough to know that this is normal. Like it's normal for me to be nervous for this kind of job and this kind of role. So just like feel it, allow yourself to feel it, and know that you're going to grow into it, and just do your best while you can. And that's what I did.
Before that job, did you listen to UFC commentary, maybe by John Anik, by Mike Goldberg, and see how they tackled the sport and try putting that into your own words essentially and putting your own style on it?
Yeah, I had talked to Anik on the phone. He was nice enough to give me a call and kind of walk me through like what helped him when he was in his early days. Goldberg, I didn't have any connection with and didn't talk to or anything like that. He had already moved on from the UFC the year before, but Anik was still obviously plugged in and was the main UFC commentator at that point. So I was able to talk to him. What I did is I just watched a lot of fights on UFC Fight Pass, and just went through the archives of different fights. And I've always had a pretty good ear of like understanding how something should sound. Like I'm no expert in soccer or football, as you call it, but I'm an expert enough in terms of broadcasting and play by play. So if I was asked to do that job, I know how it should sound, right? And I know what I should lean on from the experts or the analyst. And that's what I did with the UFC. Just watch enough of it, understand how it should sound to fans and to the broadcast and what they're looking for it to sound like, and then just try to do your best job with it in your own voice.
You still find you still learning from people like John Anik or other commentators on other promotion about how to improve your own game?
I don't know if I actively study them. It's not a bad idea to. I would just say I always continue to keep my eyes and ears open to learn to do new things. So it's not like I will discuss things with John Anik or John Gooden about like the mechanics of it. Maybe if we're like together at a restaurant or something like that, then we would certainly talk shop. We would certainly talk about the job and what we do. But it's not like an active learning thing. I'll just say that like I still watch the fights. So whenever you watch something over and over again, you might notice something new, the same way that if you watch somebody doing anything, you might notice their different techniques if you're an expert in it yourself. So whether it's the mechanics of a walk or how they work with an analyst or certain phrasing, words to use, times to talk during a fight or times to not talk during a fight. I'm always like, just trying to level up in whatever I'm doing. So I'll notice different things, but it's not like an active learning process. It's not like I'm going to sit down and be like, I want to learn this better. Let me watch and pay attention on that. It's kind of more, it's more like a natural osmosis type of thing.
I think in an interview you said with Ben Davies, you were talking about how for your audition you were commentating on Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway on that card. How was that
Yeah.
now commentating on two Max Holloway fights? How was that experience like?
Yeah. That was, I always come back to that event, UFC 212. And the way the audition was set up, I called 4 fights in the middle of that card. So I didn't call the Max Holloway fight against Jose Aldo itself, but I did. I called 4 fights on that card. One of them was Marlon Moraes against Rafael Assunção, and that was Marlon Moraes' UFC debut. He ended up losing by split decision in that fight. And then what's crazy is a few years later in Fortaleza, Brazil, they did the rematch. It was Marlon Moraes and Rafael Assunção in the main event. And so that was kind of an interesting coincidental kind of recircling back to my audition where I was just like, wow, I called this fight. I was trying to figure out mixed martial arts and who the players were. And Marlon Moraes was a big free agent signing at the time. And then sure enough, he lived up to the hype and climbed his way into title contention and ultimately fought Henry Cejudo for the title. But also the Max Holloway thing, it's like he was on such a tear, but that was like his coronation, right? Beating Jose Aldo in Brazil. He was like taking over as the featherweight king. And, I think Alexander Volkanovski has certainly made a case for the greatest featherweight of all time. But one thing that you can say is that Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski are probably the three greatest featherweights of all time. And so it was just interesting to see back then in my audition when I was so brand new with this sport and with the UFC that happened. And Max Holloway still going all these years and now fighting the Korean Zombie in Singapore. And I'll be over in Singapore calling that one. And so it's just, it's great. I'm always grateful for the big opportunities that I've been able to have.
Is that a pinch me moment when you get to call a Max Holloway fight? Like you said, someone you on your debut audition essentially, you're commentating on his card.
Well, I mean, it's enough of a job now where like most of the assignments are pretty, I don't want to say normal, but I know that I'm up for some of these big spots, to call some of these big fights. I mean, I called Justin Gaethje fights right away, and I called the 25th anniversary show when I was my first year on the job. It was November of 2018. I hadn't even been calling UFC fights for a year, and they entrusted me with calling the 25th anniversary show in Denver. It was pretty surreal that I had that big of an opportunity that early on calling for the UFC. So I've always felt at home calling big fights because they had the trust in me to call these big events right away and some of these big fighters. But certainly Max Holloway was one of those guys where I had wondered if I'd ever call one of his fights because he was such a champion, a Hall of Famer, certainly, and had all these accolades, and he fought a lot on pay-per-views. And I just wondered, I wonder if I'll ever call a Max Holloway fight in the same way that I wonder if I'll ever call another Sean O'Malley fight. I called his Contender Series fight, and I have not called a Sean O'Malley fight since because he just blew up and became a big star right away. He might go his whole career, and I might not call a Sean O'Malley fight again. Max Holloway, I thought might have been in that camp, but you just never know. You just keep doing the best you can for as long as you can, and certain things materialize.
Talking about your first 4 years in the UFC, you was like you said, you commented on Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier. Also on that card, I believe it was Israel Adesanya. Looking at where his careers took him, are you grateful you was able to commentate on a Izzy fight?
Yeah, I didn't commentate on that one. The Gaethje Poirier was that was in 2018. That was a John Anik fight, but I did call Gaethje a couple of times. But I did call Adesanya against Brad Tavares. That might have been his third UFC appearance. So Izzy fought in Perth in 2018. I think he fought in Arizona shortly after that, and then he stayed busy. Well, he fought Vettori in Arizona, and then he fought Brad Tavares in the main event. So that was the fight that I called of Israel Adesanya against Brad Tavares. And some people, he might have even been an underdog in that fight, if you can believe it. Adesanya might have been an underdog. And some people were saying that it was too much too soon. He's fighting a ranked opponent. He hasn't even been in the UFC for a year. How will he do with 5 rounds? All those questions had not been answered on Israel Adesanya yet. And I just remember the confidence that he had that week. I sat down with him face to face, like just one-on-one, and, kind of like got a sense of who he is. And he was just so confident, but not in a negative way. Like it wasn't something that was holding him back. He was just so confident and almost knew what he was capable of. And it was just about showing everybody else what he was capable of. And he certainly had to do that even more, especially after losing to Alex Pereira. And he's done it again. And I like him as a person a lot. Seems like a really genuine person, good guy, good for the sport, great for the UFC in terms of wanting to stay busy and fight a lot. And I'm glad that he's a UFC fighter. That's for sure.
Before fight nights, obviously you have the fighters meeting where you get to talk to the athletes and the coaches. What is that experience like? Whilst they couldn't wait, being able to talk to these athletes?
Yeah, I mean, the goal of those is to just the goal of those is to really figure out like where they're at with their preparation and what they're focused on the most. I mean, it's obviously just to get as much information as we can so that we can pass it along to fans in the best way possible. It differs depending on who you are. For instance, like somebody like me is after different bits of information than somebody like Felder or Dominic Cruz or Bisping or DC or whoever else is calling the fight. So, I mostly want to know what's going on in their lives, their story, what's important to them right now. I'll certainly talk fighting with them, but the analysts are the ones that are after what they're working on. Like, did they really drill a lot of jujitsu because of this fight, or wrestling, or did they try to level up their boxing because they're expect a stand up kind of match? But for me, it's like I want to know, did you get married in the last 6 months? Like, do you have a kid on the way? What is happening in your life right now that's important to you that kind of tells the story of where you're at beyond just what making the walk and fighting? I can lean on the other guys for telling the story of who they are and how they fight. Certainly that's a part of our narrative as well, but also got to remember that they're real life people that have real life situations just like all of us. And I think fans like to hear those stories as well.
Definitely, it's what makes a fighter at the end of the day, especially in the UFC, seeing their story from maybe hitting rock bottom to going to be a champion, like we've seen Michael Bisping do. Obviously, that was before maybe you're a fan of the sport. But
Yeah.
what is Michael
Yeah.
Bisping like to commentate with?
Oh man. It's like what you see is what you get. Like everybody the reason why I think a lot of people like when I work with Bisping is because it's almost like you're a part of a fun conversation, right? And I think that's when sports broadcasting is at its best, because at the heart of it, sports are for entertainment, right? We're watching things for entertainment. And yeah, we want our teams to win, or we want our favorite fighter to win, but really we want a good show. And part of that good show is the narrative and who's telling the story, which is obviously the position that I'm in, and then Bisping joins as the expert. But also, like, don't you want it to feel like somebody is on the end of your couch in your living room? And just like when you watch fights at home with your friends or your family, and you're making some jokes and you're reacting to the fight and you're talking about the crazy stories that these fighters have. um, our goal is to almost be as natural as possible in that setting. And that's part of that is not taking it too seriously. Part of that is understanding that it's entertainment, that it's fun. So we're allowed to have fun. And I think we strike great balance. Me and Bisping became quick friends. I mean, even though we're from across different sides of the ocean, I think there's a lot of similarities from people from the New England and people from England. And so, like, we know when to bust each other's chops and joke at each other's expense. We can both laugh at ourselves, and I think it just makes a better on-air product for everybody watching.
Talking about Joker with Bisping, one of the most iconic moments, I think it was earlier this year, was you and Bisping with the alliteration in one of the earlier fight nights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What was that like, having that moment in the middle of the fight?
yeah. That was just, honestly, it was a pretty boring fight. Really, it was just a fight where not much was happening, and so Bisping kind of said a certain thing. And I remember back to my school days, I feel like I was never a math person. I was always better at the language arts, which is why I can now talk for a living a lot better than I could solve math problems for a living. So those are the type of things where it's just like, you just have fun. And if the microphone is on for 6 hours, some things are going to be really funny, some things are going to be forgettable. And in the world of social media, if somebody turns something into a funny clip or notices that it's funny, then they can post the video of it and react to it, and everybody else can laugh, even if they weren't watching that fight or if they weren't watching the UFC. And I don't know. It's just it was a pretty innocent, funny moment made better by social media editing. And that happens. That happens. It's fun when that happens.
Yeah, I remember watching that fight like in the morning over here in the UK, then seeing it going on like TikTok and on Twitter and seeing like BT Sports have already edited it and everything, and it's on your story,
Yeah.
on Michael's story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just you know, that's kind of what happened in Mexico City when I went under the table. Is like, uh, I never thought that was like in the moment. I was just like, I wasn't in danger. I was just trying to stay kind of level headed on the broadcast. And then it's like after um, the show was over, when somebody put it on a blog and was just like, "Oh, UFC commentator goes under the table while fans in Mexico pelt the octagon with beer." Like they jazzed up the headline, so it was like sounded way worse. They're way different of a situation than it was, and so then all of a sudden it becomes this big thing. Whereas like in the moment, you never think anything's going to be that big. Like I was kind of surprised at how big it became. And then after, you're like, oh, okay, I guess they're going to run with this, you know? And so the alliteration line, I just thought that was a funny moment in the broadcast that some people might chuckle along to. But again, when somebody else notices it and, you know, edits something together and puts out an Instagram or a TikTok, then it's like, oh, okay, I guess people will laugh at this more than I thought they would, but that's fine.
I think it made it even better with DC at the end, you know, laughing and then saying,
Yeah,
"This
yeah,
guy
yeah.
Bisping, he's so smart."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Obviously, being able to work with different UFC fights, did you think when in 2018 when you first commentated on Fight Nights, do you think Daniel Cormier would go on to be a color commentator and be as successful as he is?
Um, you know, he had already started working as a color commentator back then, in 2018. It wasn't much before then. I think he started in like 2016. He started calling fights, but he obviously was still an active fighter and he was defending his title. So he was still working into the job. The first time I worked with DC, I noticed right away how good he is at being a broadcaster. He's another one like Bisping, where um, helps if you're a champion, a legend, a Hall of Famer in the sport, but then to have a real understanding of what we're doing, to have a real understanding of what makes the show. Yes, you want the expertise, you want the fight analysis. Uh, we're here to speak about these fighters in this sport with as much respect as possible in terms of what they do and what they're trying to do, but it's also about having a lot of fun. And DC is somebody that really strikes that balance well, I think. I think that he obviously knows the ins and outs of fighting, and double champion, Hall of Famer, all the accolades you could ever want, but he also knows how to have fun, and he knows how to make other people have fun. It's the type of guy, when he walks into a room, everybody's going to smile because he's just that guy that just picks up the energy of an entire room. And when you put a headset on him, he's going to do that to the entire broadcast as well. So it's just, he's to me, is no surprise at how big he's become. And I think he's going to become even bigger. I just think he's one of those people that's going to continue to rise. Even though his athletic career is done, he's just going to continue to rise and do whatever he wants to do.
Who do you see from the current UFC roster would be the best color commentator once they hang up the gloves?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, well, Michael Chiesa does our does desk shows, right? And I think that he would. I know that he would love to call some UFC fights, and I think that he'd be very good. Um, I would argue that he's probably the closest in terms of joining. I don't think we're looking, you know, I don't think we're expanding, but it's one of those things you're always gonna try to keep your eye on who else might join. And I think that Michael Chiesa is a guy that really has a great eye for fighting, and he's so into it. Like he is so into breaking down all the fights. It's not just about when he's in fight camp and trying to improve his own game. I think that he really, really enjoys telling the stories, seeing how all these different fighters train and react and prepare. So I think he's a great candidate, somebody who's still an active fighter. I would, off the top of my head, I would have to say he's the one.
How do you do your research before a fight? Obviously, I think you said on Bisping's podcast a few years ago that you watch every fight, so doing the research is essentially easy for you.
Yeah, I try to me it's tough to like going back to watch fights is something that's necessary sometimes, but I have a pretty good memory. So what I try to do is realize that like when I'm watching a fight that I'm not calling, I'm trying to put it in the memory bank. If something interesting happens, I'm going to remember that. And certainly when it comes to if I call their next fight, sometimes you have to go back and watch fights and be reminded. For the most part, I do my research by consuming a lot of content that fans do. You go on YouTube and you watch media day interviews. Obviously, I have access to more fighters. If Calvin Cater's fighting, I can text him directly. Like I can give him a call. I can certainly give his coach a call. There's like a lot of connections that I have. So that is, obviously like an inside baseball type of thing where I can go to. But I think reading as many articles that are out there, watching as much content with interviews and podcasts on YouTube and various platforms is definitely a way to do it. And then like watching old fights, there's really not like one proper way to prepare for calling fights. It's using whatever's out there, and you find new ways to do it. Like if a fighter is from Brazil, you can generally find an article written in Portuguese and then use Google Translate and then translate that article into English and then understand what they're saying too. So there's just a lot of different ways to find information. And as long as you feel like you have enough information to give that athlete the respect that they deserve in terms of telling the story of who they are, how they fight, and like what that particular fight means to them and the arc of their career, then I think that, you're good to go.
Is it easier, like you said before, finding research about Calvin Cater than someone on maybe the first fight of the prelims?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, yeah, like think of how much is out there on Israel Adesanya compared to a fighter making his UFC debut that's from Brazil that doesn't speak English. There's probably no article out there on the Brazilian fighter that doesn't speak English. Like even in Brazil, they're largely unknown. So, sometimes I would say it's easier to call like the bigger the fight is, it's easier to call. Like, how much do I need to know about Justin Gaethje that I don't already know? If I'm preparing for a Justin Gaethje fight, I want to talk to Justin Gaethje about what he's done differently in the previous 3 to 4 months. I don't have to know his whole story. I already know, by and large, his story. Grew up in rural Arizona. Father worked in the mines. Very working class family. College wrestler at Northern Colorado. Found his way to mixed martial arts. World Series of Fighting. Was like, had a ton of knockouts before coming into the UFC. UFC debut was in the main event against Michael Johnson. It was one of the fights of the year in 2018 or 2017. So I could just rattle that off to you about Justin Gaethje without even looking up anything. But it's like a new fighter that comes from the Czech Republic that is like 6-0. Well, I don't know much about them, so there's a lot more to know. So that's kind of the battle.
Going from obviously lockdown, there was fight nights at the Apex, empty crowds. How's that going from that to now going to sold out arenas like Kansas City and having a venue sold out of fans?
Yeah, I mean, I miss the fans a lot because I still don't go to many arenas. We're still obviously doing a lot of fights at the Apex, and by and large, I'm the most of those cards because I live here in Las Vegas and I'm the fight night commentator. So I did 2 trips in 2022 to San Diego and Austin, Texas. And so far this year, I've done 2 trips to San Antonio and Kansas City. But other than that, I've been at the Apex pretty much exclusively for the last 3 years. So I'm not in full arenas as much as I'd like to be. But and it's because of that energy. Like the crowd provides so much to the fighters. I believe that the fights are better in full arenas because they feel the energy of the crowd. Certainly on the broadcast, more fans in the background is a better TV product. So I relish the chance to get in front of fans and to be in the big arenas, but we've obviously learned how to put on quality product at the Apex. And so whatever it takes to keep the train moving, that's what we do.
Going from the Apex, do you feel like you can't be as loud as maybe on a fight night? Because we've seen during lockdown some of the fighters talking to the commentary booth.
No, not for me. I almost try to be louder, honestly, at the Apex. I don't really care if they can hear me or not or what I'm saying. I mean, I'm never going to say anything that's like controversial or disrespectful. I can understand the color commentators had to get used to it because they didn't want to, for instance, like if they can hear us and DC is telling us about and the fans about what this fighter needs to do to get out of this position and they're 5 feet away from us and they can hear it, well, then that's a different type of thing. But if I'm just calling the fights, I'm calling the fights and I'm talking about their history and I'm talking about maybe what they were working on, that sort of thing. To me, I want to give more energy from my position at the Apex because it needs it, because there's not the crowd there. So I don't. Once you go on the air, once you have a headset on, that stuff is pretty easy to tune out and not realize that they're hearing you and what their reactions might be. You just call it. You just call it like you would any other fight.
We've heard many times the commentary booth's one of the best seats in the house. Do you watch the fights from the monitor or through the cage?
A combination of both. I find myself in the apex watching the fights more in the cage. Um, there's certain times within the fight where you're taking a risk when you keep your eyes on the fighters within the cage because they can move so quickly and then your vision can get blocked based on which way the fighters are facing. So the job of our director in the control room is to make sure that fans on TV use their different cameras at their disposal and always show the best view of the fight so you can see what happens. So I find myself watching in the cage as often as I can because it is a great seat and you can really see it up close and maybe notice some things that you can on the monitor. But I think that watching in the cage too much is a bit of a risk, and I think on the monitor allows you to see exactly like what shots land. I think the in person is better for maybe seeing like where a cut is sometimes, or something that the cameras can't tell you. But yeah, it's a balance of both.
Do you use do you guys have the same angles and vision as fans have from the monitor?
The monitors that we're watching is the exact same thing that what you guys are watching.
Obviously,
Yeah,
work,
there is an extra monitor that shows us replays. So sometimes you'll hear the commentators say, "Oh, we're just seeing the replay now. Yeah, he got him with a bit of an eye poke or something like that." That's because we do have an extra monitor that can show us replays during the fight. Like while the fight's still going, they can show us a replay to see what happened. But by and large, we're seeing the exact same things that you guys are seeing on TV.
talking about eye pokes and groin strikes, do you find that ruins your flow of being a commentator?
It just as long as the stoppage isn't too long, then I think it gets right back into it. You hate when there's I mean, it just sucks when there's a fight with like two groin strikes and an eye poke, and like each stoppage is like a minute or 2 minutes or whatever. It's just like, gosh, like there's just a lot of time, especially in the apex. There's just a lot of time and they're like a silent environment, not much fans, and you're just waiting for somebody's eye to get better for like 2 minutes. So that's when you just kind of talk about whatever's going on, kill the time, look at the replays, and there's not much you can do about it, but just roll with it. But if it's like if it's a groin strike and there's a halt in the action for 45 seconds, I don't find that to be too disruptive. It's just when there's a number of them within the same fight, or a number of fights in a row that have some sort of infraction like that, then it just gets a little clunky.
As well as MMA, do you watch any other sports in your spare time, or is it just MMA?
Oh yeah, no, I love sports, man. Like I said, I covered team sports like all throughout my career, and really like I grew up playing ice hockey and football, were my American football were my two big favorite sports. But I played everything. I played lacrosse, I played baseball, um, like golf. I've always liked tennis. I mean, there's not really a sport that I dislike. In terms of really being a fan of other sports, I'd say ice hockey is definitely my favorite sport. I had always, if you ask me over the span of my 40 years of life, ice hockey is definitely my favorite sport. But MMA this is the best job I've had by far, is covering MMA, and working for the UFC is the sport that I didn't see coming. I didn't predict myself loving it as much as I do, but it's been quite a ride. It's been great.
A bit of a fun question out here. If you had to choose your dream booth, Dana White says, Brendan Fitzgerald, you get Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Like you could build your own booth. Who are you choosing to commentate with you?
Oh, build my own booth.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a tough question because I hate to leave off everybody. I would say like I'll just go to the booth that I probably work with more than any other, and that's working with Felder and Bisping. I think I work with Felder and Bisping as a three-man group more than any other tandem, more than any other group of three. And I guess it'd be that one. I can't go wrong with any of them. I've never worked with Joe Rogan. I imagine it's quite an experience. Dom Cruz is I'm in awe of how Dom Cruz sees fights. Like I told you before, DC is like one of my favorite people on the planet. So there's really no wrong answer in terms of who you can call fights with. But Bisping and Paul Felder and me, I think, have a pretty good dynamic of calling a fight, having some fun, being similar personalities. Earlier this year in San Antonio, we went out for a dinner on Thursday, and it was just us three, and it was just like such a great time. It was like one of my favorite meals I've had like in the last 10 years, and so I was just like, yeah, these guys are great. So it was a lot of fun.
Living in Vegas, how do you find the heat in Vegas being desert like?
The heat isn't that bad. Um, you know, the heat is really bad in July and August, right? It's in the summer months, it's hotter here than it is in most places. So some people that come here, they just, I think, get the misconception that it's always 105 degrees in Las Vegas, when in actuality, like in the winter, like we'll get a dusting of snow here and there. Like it'll be in the 50s from like December to like early March. It's like anywhere from like 45 degrees to 70 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius. I know that like 30 degrees is super hot. So it's really only like 29, 30, whatever in that range, like 2 months a year, maybe 2.5 months a year. It's really not that bad, but certainly on International Fight Week, like when we have a big event in July and a lot of fight fans come out here, and a lot of people have vacation in the summertime. So if they make it to Las Vegas in July, August, early September, something like that, then they're just like, oh my goodness, it's so hot here. But it's really not, 100 degrees all year round. That's a misconception that not only people have abroad, but people even in the United States. I think people where I'm from in Massachusetts, they think of Las Vegas as this tropical place year round, and then they'll come here in the winter with a bathing suit, and it's like it's not pool weather. It's not pool weather out here. So I like Las Vegas's climate. A lot of sunshine, certainly hot summers, which I don't dislike, and mild winters, which I'll take.
Yeah, ironically, I went to Vegas this time last year on holiday, and I thought it was so hot. We had every time we walked to maybe like from the Cosmopolitan Hotel to MGM, we went through buildings and shopping malls just to get that AC breeze.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so what month was it?
It was literally like this time last year, like this date last
Yeah,
year.
June.
Yeah,
June last year. Yeah. So I mean, right now, for instance, it's like raining outside, and like yesterday was in the 80s, 80s and low 90s, which is probably, I don't know, what is it, 28 degrees, something like that,
yeah.
right? But yeah, so we're just entering that time of year, right? But come September, mid-September, it's uh it's not so bad. And I would prefer the heat to the snow. So the fact that we don't get a lot of snow, but we get crazy heat, to me is a trade-off that I would rather have.
Well, to finish up, Brendan, I've got a bit of word association, UFC commentators. First word, first face that comes to your mind.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan. I'll give you a little sentence, not a word, but like as a podcaster, he's changed the game. I'm in awe of how much he's changed the game in the podcasting world, and I told him that when I saw him last year.
John Anik.
John Anik, he's a technician. I would say he's a technician. He's very in tune to what he's doing. He's very on the screws. He's very precise with how he chooses to word things and his preparation.
Paul Felder.
Paul Felder, good guy.
Michael
Good
Bisping.
guy. Down to earth guy. Good endurance too. We should probably put in good endurance. Bisping is a character.
DC.
DC is a jolly character.
Dom Cruise.
Dom Cruz is he's a thinker.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor to talk to you and pleasure to have you on.
Thanks very much, Jay. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.